Hey, welcome back, Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950 and over at DougPagittRadio.com. I'd like to call our little program Religious Radio That's Not Quite Right conversation. And we try to do a conversation with people who are provoking thought, provoking religion, provoking goodness in our world in some way. In the second hour. So we have a conversation. We're going to be joined by Jana Riess. Jana is the author of a book called Flunking Sainthood. It's a clever little book.
It is.
It's crafty. In fact, she could be over at the craft fair over at 46th and Blaisdell Avenue, speaking of craft fairs.
Holy segue.
Holy segue. See, that's why these people pay this kind of money to be on these radio stations.
Obviously.
Jana could find herself over there at 46th and Blaisdell at the Artisan Craft Fair, picking up some of the finest crafts from all around the world. Jana Riess has written a book called Flunking Sainthood. I love the subtitle, A Year of Breaking the Sabbath, Forgetting to Pray, and Still Loving My Neighbor. Hey, Jana, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So glad to have you on. This is a clever little book. You set out to do that thing that people are doing in book projects these days of taking a year and engaging in a set of practices. And for you decided to follow a set of a dozen spiritual practices or something like that?
Yes, that's right. So the first one is fasting as if it were Ramadan, not eating from sunup to sundown for a month. I also tried fixed-hour prayer. I tried the Orthodox Jewish Sabbath, centering prayer, lots of different things. So interesting year. And
your goal was to see if you could find something valuable in each of those. Is that right?
I'm not sure that I had a goal. How's that?
Well, you just
I went in with the idea that this would be a really interesting and fun experiment, and I was not all that intentional in the practices that I chose. They were things that I had admired in other people. I had a friend who was an Orthodox Jew, and I admired the way that she kept the Sabbath. I had another friend who did fixed-hour prayer and would disappear at noon, at 3 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, and I didn't know why, and then I found out that she was praying the hours. So it was more a question of could I do these things that I admire in other people? It turns out no.
Yeah, well, talk a little bit about that, because you grew up in a family that wasn't particularly religious, so it's not as if you had an insatiable religious desire inside of you, but you were trying to see if something that was so good in these other people's lives could be good for you, and as you entitle the book, you flunked sainthood.
I did, and I wish I could say that it's in the past tense, but I am still flunking today after having written the book. So,
yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of people out there who have set high standards or high goals for spirituality or getting closer to God, and then found that while the practices were valuable, they didn't necessarily yield the results that we hoped for.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. Is that because sometimes these practices sort of oversell themselves? Is it because different personalities do well with a certain kind of practice, or what were you discovering in yourself about that they could be so powerful in one person's life, but so difficult for you?
I think that's a great question. I would say the latter, that there are different spiritual practices because there are so many different kinds of people. I mean, it seems obvious to say that, but it wasn't obvious to me until the end of the year, and I realized that I had resonated with a few of the practices, even though I didn't really succeed all that well at any of them. There were a few that I really loved and have still attempted to implement in my life, and there were others that just didn't speak to me at all, including centering prayer, which is this. Yeah,
describe that for people who don't know what some of these practices are. What is centering prayer, and what did you do, and what was it supposed to do in you or with you?
Well, I'll tell you what centering prayer is supposed to be, and then I'll tell you what it was like for me. It's supposed to be a deep contemplative prayer. You sit down for 20 or 30 minutes, and you commune with God. You have a phrase or a word to think on. Maybe it's Jesus or peace or something along those lines. And then any other thoughts that are coming into your mind at that time, you're supposed to picture them as they are on a sailboat and they're floating away on this beautiful stream. And I just found that I am not contemplative in that way. I have this monkey mind, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to go to the grocery store, and what's that sound outside? Oops, squirrel.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't have that kind of mind, and I think that if I had kept it up, perhaps I could cultivate that to some degree, because, these are practices that are intended to be taken up for a lifetime, not just 30 days. But I also think that contemplative prayer probably isn't the best spiritual practice for someone like me.
Now, I've heard from people, because I say that same kind of thing, like, I can't do that, like, quiet stuff. Like, my mind makes me crazy when I'm being quiet. And and then I get this smug little look from my contemplative friends that are like, well, you're the one who needs it more than anyone. Did you have that sense of, like, maybe this is what I need because it's not what I would sort of naturally do?
That's a really good question. I definitely am with you in terms of personality and what we kind of gravitate toward. And that may be true that maybe we need it more than other people. I don't know. It takes all kinds of people to make a world and to make up a spiritual life that is, nourishing for everyone.
Okay, so you did the contemplative side, which didn't work well with your mind. Talk a little bit about fasting. What was that part like? Was that one that you did well on, or was there some disconnect for you in the fasting practice?
Fasting was interesting because it wasn't a practice that I failed at in terms of the actual practice. I never cheated on my fast or anything like that.
Really?
So, by the book, really. By the book, it seems like it would have been a success.
And tell us which kind of fasting you did. Did you do one where from sun up to sundown you took nothing into your body except water, or?
Nothing at all, actually.
Nothing at all.
So in a Muslim fast, you are eating breakfast before the sun comes up, and then you fast for the entire day until the sun goes down, and then you usually break the fast with other people. And in Islam, there's a prescribed ritual involving dates, and not dates as in let's go out on a date, but dates as in figs and nuts and that sort of thing, where they sit down and will break the fast together. And what I found was that, first of all, fasting is really not a practice that is as nourishing when done alone as it is when done in community. And the fact that I chose Ramadan, I realized at the end of the month that maybe it wasn't just because I had a Muslim friend and I admired her, but also it was because I envied this sense of, 1.2 billion Muslims around the world all fasting together. There's such beauty and power in that. So I kind of went about it the wrong way, if that's what I was after, because fasting in isolation, I would cook dinner for my husband and my daughter, and then I would just sit there and watch them like a vulture until the sun went down, and then I'd cram everything in my mouth, which is not necessarily the most spiritual way to approach it.
And Ramadan is a movable date, right, in the calendar. So sometimes it's during the time of the year where in our parts of the world, the time between sunrise and sundown is longer. I bet you were wishing that it could have been like a middle of January Ramadan, where it was.
Well, I did mine in February. I did it right off the bat because I thought it would be the most physically rigorous practice. And February is not only the shortest month in terms of having only 28 days, but also the days were shorter. So wow, when I think about how hard that was, and then I think about Muslims fasting in August, when maybe the sun doesn't go down until 9:30 in the evening. That's very, very taxing.
Yeah, and what was there something about your the Lectio Divina? That was another one of the practices that you engaged in. For people who don't know that spiritual practice, what is the Lectio Divina?
Sure. Well, it's a way of reading the Bible that is very deep and very careful study. So you're not just kind of glossing over in order to get information or in order to check off, I did my reading today. You are really supposed to be engaging very carefully and praying along with the Scripture as you do it. And it is a very powerful practice. What I did was a little bit different in that I found with my whole monkey mind thing that it would be better for me to listen to it on audio while I was out walking the dog and just, running my errands than it would be to try to sit down and focus on a printed text. And I also think that there is such a power in the Gospels in particular, orally, as they were meant to be heard. The Gospels were never meant to be read in the way that we read them today. They were meant to be heard in community. And so I wanted to try to emulate that. And it was interesting because I read the Gospel of Mark over and over and over again that month. And I noticed lots of things I'd never noticed before. I mean, it's like how I read Harry Potter. I want to read Harry Potter so that every time I go through, I'm going to notice all these details that I didn't see before. And one thing that I found that was very uncomfortable is that Jesus is so angry in the Gospel of Mark. I mean, it's very different.
Interesting.
Yeah, when you listen to the whole thing together.
Who's he mad at? The same people I'm
shouting
mad
at
at all the
everyone,
time?
and he's shouting in your very own personal ear. You know, it's not necessarily the sweet shepherd that I like to envision.
Interesting.
It's very powerful.
And because you're listening to the audio version of it, someone else is putting a tone of voice or an attitude behind the statement.
Yes.
You're not able to do that in your own voice in your head, which is what we do when we read, right? We read in our own. The sound that we imagine in our head is what we determine it to be, where when you listen to it, it's what someone else determined it to be.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. And did you choose April for Lectio Divina on purpose? Was there something about the order of how you were doing these different spiritual practices?
There wasn't anything particular about April for that practice. Some of the practices I just chose so that they would fit in with family considerations or with our lives. You know, for example, in July, I was doing the Orthodox Sabbath, which was a pretty demanding kind of practice, and a lot of planning went into it. For example, you have to, cook everything in advance. You have to pre-shred your own toilet paper because you can't rip or tear things on the Sabbath. I didn't know that until halfway through, and I'm like, oops, screwed that up. But so the month after that,
really?
In August, we were going on our family vacation, and I decided that month would be what I thought would be the easiest practice of the year, which was gratitude, just trying to cultivate gratitude. And actually, it turns out that gratitude in a sustained, intentional way is a lot more complicated than it appears. It's not just, sitting down and having a bountiful Thanksgiving feast, as we all hope to do in a couple weeks here. It's something else entirely, of being grateful to God, even for the very basic things that we take for granted. That's what I was aiming for.
And what was the practice that was associated with gratitude?
Well, I was writing thank you notes to people that I loved about very specific things that they had done in my life to change my life and make it better, ways that they had cared for me and loved me. So that was part of it, and part of it was keeping a gratitude journal. So I had to write down 5 things every day that I was grateful for. And I think the failure in terms of that month came just looking through my gratitude journal and realizing how shallow so many of those things were. Like peaches were in season, and I was grateful for peaches like every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you suggest in the book, look, you failed at the sort of the prescribed nature of what these practices were meant to do. But there was some profound change in you, or there was some profound happening in you.
Yes. The book is very lighthearted. Mm-hmm. The first 12 chapters of the book are funny and lighthearted, and then the epilogue of the book is completely different. And out of the blue, I had an experience that I never would have predicted. So I had already turned in the manuscript for the book last year. This was about a year ago, last fall. And shortly after that, I got a phone call that my father, that I had not seen or heard from in 26 years, was dying in a hospital in Alabama, and I was listed as his next of kin.
Wow. And you wouldn't have known that. You wouldn't have expected that.
Oh, boy. No, not at all. This is someone who had, left our family, had taken everything we had, hurt us in so many ways, and, he had basically cut himself off from everyone. And so suddenly to be facing this situation. Oh, and they also said, would you please make the decision of whether to continue his life support?
Wow.
Yeah. It was horrible, really. But from something greater than myself, I was able to go to Alabama, drop everything, be at his bedside, and forgive him. There was something that had happened to me in the course of all these failures, all these practices that I had dismissed as being things that had not helped, that did change me.
That's Jana Riess. She's the author of a book called Flunking Sainthood, A Year of Breaking the Sabbath, Forgetting to Pray, and Still Loving My Neighbor. It's a book worth picking up. You can find it at all the places where they sell books. You can find it online. You can find it at bookstores and so on. Jana, can you stick with us for another segment?
Yes, I'd love to.
Yeah, folks, stick with us. And our own little saint, Jana Riess. I mean, around here, you're still pretty saintly. So our own Saint Jana Riess will be with us here after the break on Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950 and DougPagittRadio.com.